The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and if you're somewhere in between, hello and welcome to the first day of Asset Management Awareness Month 2023. My name is Scott Ray. I'm joined today by another Scott, Scott Wold, who will be presenting on the basics of fleet management for property managers. But before we get into the presentation today, I just wanted to, again, welcome you. I am the Vice President of Events and Seminars, which was a new position created that's part of the Executive Board, and just really happy to have you here today. We have five presentations occurring over the month of March to help celebrate Asset Management Awareness Month. All of these presentations are offered at no cost, and for attending, there are CEUs that you'll be granted as well. So thank you for being here today. Please consider attending the other sessions that will be coming up later in the month if they work out for your schedule. But if they do not, all of the presentations from the month will be up and available on our YouTube page a couple weeks following the end of March. So a couple things to think about here as you're looking at your screens. There is a zoom in and zoom out feature, which you can also use. You can do that manually. If you have a mouse, you can pull my picture bigger or smaller. There's a bar there. If you just hover above the bar, there's a up and down arrow. If you pull that forward, I get bigger. If you pull that back, I get smaller, and the presentation gets bigger. So keep that in mind. The other thing to point out is questions. If you do have questions, there is either I think you can just type them either in the chat box, or there could also be a question box for you to submit questions in. Go ahead and submit those as they come up throughout the presentation, but we are going to hold the actual questions themselves for the end. So go ahead and get them in there. Lisa in the background will go ahead and make note of those, and then we'll address those at the very, very end. And with that, I just want to say a quick thank you and shout out to the team that helped this month become what it is in terms of planning. So Bob Kaler, Connie Aaron, Lisa Williams, Amanda Jensen, thank you very much for all your effort and help in putting this together. So with that, I'd like to welcome in the other Scott, Scott Wold. And Scott, welcome to the broadcast. I hope you're doing well today. I will go ahead and mute myself and get out of your way and let you roll on with your presentation.
All right. Hey, thanks, Scott. Again, my name is Scott Wold. I'm a certified federal fleet manager, and I'm a vice president for TechSystems Incorporated, and I work in their fleet consulting group. Prior to that, I spent about 14 years as a division director at Idaho National Laboratory, or INL. The INL is an 890 square mile laboratory, one of the 17 Department of Energy laboratories, and the main focus of work out there is on nuclear research, energy systems, and security. And as my role as division director, I had 5 departments underneath me. One of them was the fleet management. One was bus operations that I'll talk about. We operated a mass transit system there. Another one was property, another supply operations, and the last was our logistics. So with that, just kind of give you a heads up, fleets come in various shapes and sizes. On the left, that's the Idaho National Laboratory. As I mentioned, we operated a mass transit system. So our fleet consists of over 80 full-size motor coaches. Basically, we'll transport between 2,000 and 3,000 employees every day out to work. As you can imagine, doing nuclear nuclear research, you probably don't want to be down in the middle of town. So we are literally 50 miles out in the middle of the desert in southeast Idaho, in all kinds of weather and conditions, and just as a safety and then also as a sustainability initiative, we use the motor coaches out there to transport a lot of our folks. In the background there, you can see we also do our own maintenance. So we have a 80,000 square foot maintenance shop, and the techs in there will work on everything from buses to bulldozers to mobile cranes to lawnmowers. Pretty much anything with the motor, things get repaired and updated in that shop there. One of the other things that we do that's a little bit different is we also operate our own fueling system. So fueling for the buses and for our light duty fleet. Now the other picture, it's another TechSystems Vice President Edward Chaudier and a member of the North Cascade National Park fleet. So while the mule's not actually part of the fleet, I just wanted to show a contrast between what your fleets may look like. So for example, the North Cascade National Park fleet, a lot of their equipment is going to be horse trailers and a lot of four-wheel drive vehicles to one-pole horse trailers, and then also just get through all the areas up there in, as you can see, some pretty extreme conditions. So what we'll go over today, we'll describe the relationship between property management and fleet management. We'll define fleet, yellow fleet, or you might have heard of this as yellow iron sometimes, and then motor vehicle. And then I'll give you a couple of examples of yellow fleet. We'll describe the motor vehicle life cycle. We'll describe fleet accounting and reporting tools used to control costs. We'll list data associated with the Fleet Management Information System, or FMIS. And then at the end, we'll go over some sources for you of essential information relating to fleet management. So in many organizations, vehicle management is a subset of property management. And in the federal government, that relationship is codified. So you start with the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 41, which is Public Contracts and Property Management. And you can see you drop down to Subtitle C, Chapter 102, Subchapter B, and then you get to Part 102-34, Motor Vehicle Management. And throughout the presentation, you'll hear me refer back to 102-34. And if you're in a fleet that's not a federal fleet, it's a commercial fleet or a privately owned fleet, a lot of the things that we talk about here as part of the federal government still apply to, will still apply to your fleet as well. So if you go in and take a look at 41 CFR 102-34, there's a number of subparts, and even though they're not what you would think in the right sequence, so basically you start out with obtaining fuel efficient motor vehicles, you register them, there's information in there on official use, how to replace the motor vehicles, how to schedule maintenance, how to report crashes, and how to dispose fuel and then report on your fleet. So as I said, they're not exactly in the right order that you would think about during the life cycle, but there's a lot of information in there concerning the fleets. So what is a fleet and what is a motor vehicle? So again, the source comes from 102-34, and so a fleet is basically all reportable motor vehicles, which is any vehicle self-propelled or drawn by mechanical power, designed and operated principally for highway transportation of property or passengers. So in a nutshell, basically, if the vehicle has a license plate on it and you can drive it down the highway, that's a motor vehicle. Now, what's not included is material handling and construction equipment, not primarily designed and used for highway operation. In other words, the yellow fleet. And while some of that equipment can be transported on the highway, say like a mobile crane, typically it is not something that you're going to be out on the highway a lot on, and therefore it is not included under the definition of motor vehicle. So the federal government segregates motorized equipment or the yellow fleet from cars and trucks used for highway transportation. So here's a couple of examples from the INL. You got a front end loader, getting some maintenance done on it in the shop, and then we've got a number of mobile cranes for use around the complex there. However, motorized equipment can represent a significant investment for an organization. For example, for the INL, if we were to replace all of our yellow fleet, we would need a budget of about $30 million. So with that, you can see for the laboratory and for the government, it's a pretty significant investment. And with that, you want to make sure, as we're shown with that front end loader, you want to make sure that you know where the equipment is, you maintain it, and it's utilized properly. However, sometimes the property manager may be the fleet manager for the yellow fleet. So, property versus motor vehicle life cycles. If you take a look, it's pretty similar to the personal property life cycle. The motor vehicle life cycle is defined in 102.34.340, and it's acquisition, operation, maintenance, and disposal. But as we go through these, you'll see in that acquisition section in particular, you'll still have your planning portion of the life cycle kind of built in there. So even though it looks shorter, typically everything that's in the personal property life cycle, you'll cover in the motor vehicle life cycle as well. So acquisition. So prior to acquisition, you need to ask yourself at least a couple of questions. What type of vehicle do we need, and do we buy it or do we lease it? So to optimize acquisition cost control, you want to determine the total cost of ownership. So basically, if I'm going to go out and purchase this vehicle, you want to take into account the total cost of ownership for that, including the optimum replacement timing. And I'll tell you right now, the optimum replacement timing is something that typically gets missed if you own your own vehicles. And as you can see in that chart, your annualized capital costs will drop, just like it does with everything else, but your annualized operating cost, your maintenance, repairs, everything else will rise. And the total cost, basically you end up with what's called a bathtub curve. And there's a portion or a certain period of time in there where that's the optimum replacement period for that vehicle. So in other words, your costs aren't going to start creeping back up on you due to maintenance, and you will also get the max return if you either turn in or sell that vehicle. So the importance of that timing is keeping vehicles, as we mentioned, beyond the optimum replacement cycle will impact cost and productivity due to increased vehicle maintenance and technical obsolescence. So in other words, think about all the safety enhancements and warnings and cameras and controls that are on the vehicles now compared to 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. So if you don't periodically replace your vehicles, you're going to miss out on all the new safety features and the technology that's coming out. Now, part of the reason organizations fail on this optimum replacement period is because they don't ensure that adequate funding is available to replace the fleet at the optimum time. So the best example I have of that is when I took over the fleet at the Idaho National Laboratory back in 2009, we were spending an average of $30,000 a year on maintenance to keep a bus on the road that had a book value of about $5,000. The reason we were in that situation is because we did not have adequate funding. We did not have the, what would have been about $35 or $40 million required to replace the buses at that time. So what we did, along with our light duty fleet, is we were able to get buses leased through the General Services Administration, or GSA. And by doing that, we were able to take those lease costs, and now instead of a big sunk cost at one time for a capital purchase, we're able to spread that out over time as an operational cost with the leases. And I just want to little segue right now. If you are a federal fleet and you do have vehicles from the General Service Administration, basically one of the things that the GSA fleet does for you is it will do all of this. It will make sure that you get the right vehicle that you request, and that vehicle is replaced at that optimum time. So instead of you having to worry about, hey, can I get the funding? You know, we're going to need X number of dollars next year. We've got to replace these vehicles. GSA does all that work for you. All right, so the regulations for federal fleet that affect vehicle planning and acquisition is 102.34 subpart B, obtaining fuel efficient motor vehicles. And then also, if you're in the federal government, Executive Order 14057, catalyzing clean energy industries and jobs through federal sustainability will impact you as well. So in that executive order, one of the first things it talks about is determining an optimum fleet size and composition. You may have heard of the term vehicle allocation methodology, or VAM. And essentially what this is every 5 years, the federal fleets will go out there, they'll take a snapshot of their fleet, and they'll go through a questionnaire on basically asking the questions, hey, are these vehicles being utilized? Or in other words, are they getting sufficient miles or hours on them? Do we have vehicles that have just been parked for a long time? They're not being used. Do we have a lot of pickups where we could replace those with sedans, or do we have a lot of sedans that we're using as work trucks? So maybe we should change those over to a pickup truck or some other type of vehicle. One of the misnomers with the VAM, especially when it first came out, it's a lot of people or a lot of agencies equated VAM with fleet reduction, and that is not the case. It's fleet optimization. So if your business is growing or your work scope is growing, what you would expect is your fleet would grow along with that to support the mission. Conversely, though, if your mission is, if you are downsizing, then you would expect your fleet to start downsizing as well. So through that VAM process, and basically what you should be doing annually anyway in your planning is you should be eliminating unnecessary, non-essential, old or inefficient vehicles. You should start to increase the proportion of the fleet vehicle composed of zero emission vehicles, and acquire zero emission vehicles for all new vehicle acquisitions if the GSA offers one or more ZEV operations for that vehicle class. So right now there are more and more options that are coming available. However, as you probably know, over the last year or two, with the supply chain, even though those options may be out there, the vehicles just may not be available. And the other push in this executive order is to convert agency-owned vehicles to the GSA leasing program where appropriate to accelerate the ZEV acquisition and deployment. So again, if you turn your fleet over to the GSA leasing program, they will help and basically help push and drive your conversion over to zero emission vehicles, while at the same time they're maintaining that life cycle for you and replacing the vehicles at the proper time. So some of the planning questions: what are the needs of the job of the vehicle? Is it, for example, is it going to be a shop truck? You know, do we need storage bins on there for tools? Do we need a crane? Do we need a welder? Do we need a transport fuel or other liquids in that? Is it going to be a security vehicle? Will it carry cargo? And if it won't carry cargo, what's the weight and the volume? What type of climate and terrain will it operate in? Will it be working in the desert in the Southwest, over in Florida along the Gulf Coast, or for example here in Idaho, will it be operating in conditions of -30 in the winter and 110 degrees in the summer. And again, like the example with Adlor, we'll need to pull a trailer. You know, how large a trailer and what's the weight of the material that the trailer is going to carry. All right. So motor vehicle life cycle operation begins with the receipt and distribution of the vehicle. And that refers back to 102.34 subpart C, identifying and registering motor vehicles. And proper receipt of the vehicle is critical in, to ensure that, one, you get the vehicle that you ordered, right? It's not going to do your end user any good if you ordered a four-wheel drive dual cab pickup and you know, just a you know, a small pickup or a sedan shows up. So you want to make sure that the vehicle matches the specifications of what you ordered. You also want to make sure that you capture the key vehicle data and you store it in the property management and or fleet management information system. That would be, for example, you know, the make, the model, the color, the VIN, any options that are on it. And in our case, out at the National Laboratory, we actually took pictures of the vehicles and the equipment when it came in, and those were stored into our management information system. And then any required upfitting, you want to make sure that's complete prior to assignment. And upfitting is any modification that you have to do to that vehicle. So for example, security orders, we'll say like the Chevy Tahoe. The Tahoe comes in. If it doesn't have the police package on it already, you may have to go in and put in like a light bar, put in radios, put in a gun rack, maybe some barriers between the seats. You may even have to put a lip kit on it to raise the vehicle up to get over the terrain that it's going to be operating in. So any upfitting is any modification that you have to make to that vehicle, and you want to make sure that it's completed prior to assignment because it's in the next bullet, new vehicles are rarely stored for more than a few days as they're easy to distribute. So what will happen, and if you've worked with fleet, you know that fleet is a very emotional topic for everybody. And even though that vehicle is owned by your organization or by the federal government, now, hey, this is my vehicle. This is my truck. This is my Tahoe, my sedan. And if you get that vehicle out there before that upfit, you may have a hard time getting that vehicle back into the shop or back to the dealer for the upfit. So it's a lot easier if you just do that ahead of time. So fueling. So that's another question. How do we obtain fuel? For example, do we use our on-site in the case of the Idaho National Laboratory? Do we use a federal fueling station or do we just use a commercial fueling station out in town? Then also, what type of fuel do I use in government motor vehicles? For the federal government, this is kind of a big question, and it has to do a lot with a lot of the vehicles that they put out in the field the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. They can use either regular gasoline or an alternative fuel such as E85. And with the alternative fuel for the federal government, basically, if you can use that fuel, you should be able to. Now, they do have some common sense built into that. So, for example, if you're within 3 miles of a station that offers the alternative fuel, you should use that alternative fuel station. But they don't expect you to go way out of your way to get to that station. There's a couple other criteria that would apply for a waiver, and one is, for example, WEX is a typical card that's used for fueling. If none of the stations in your area, the commercial stations, accept the WEX card, well, you can't get fuel from them. And then also another basis for waivers is cost of the fuel. So for example, E85, the fuel density or the energy density in that fuel is less than it is in regular gasoline. So in other words, if you're getting 20 miles to a gallon on regular fuel, if you fill that vehicle with E85, that fuel mileage or fuel economy may drop down to like 14 or 15 miles to a gallon. There's just not the same amount of energy per gallon in E85. So what you'll notice is if you're in an area that offers E85, if regular fuel is, I'll just make up the price, say $3 a gallon, E85 may be selling for $2 a gallon. But if you do the math, the cost per mile is going to come out roughly the same. And again, that's because of the energy density in the E85 is less. So there is an exception or where you can apply for a waiver for all fuel use based on cost. And basically, in our area, when we did have E85 available, the cost of that fuel was the same as unleaded. So if you were to do that math, the cost of the fuel is significantly higher for E85 than it would be for that regular fuel. All right, and then in EO 14507, it also basically talks about assessing your site and fleet locations to plan for efficient deployment of necessary charging or fueling infrastructure, energy storage technologies, and services to support vehicle-to-grid technology. So basically what they're saying here is it's not going to do you a lot of good to go out and buy 100 electric vehicles, battery electric vehicles, if you don't have any chargers. So basically your whole planning and between the fleet and the infrastructure has got to go hand in hand. You have to have that infrastructure available. Otherwise, those vehicles are just going to sit there and will stay parked. Now, if you do lease through GSA, the tracking of the utilization or the use of the vehicle and the fueling is handled by GSA Fleets Leasing Program. So again, another advantage or perk to lease your vehicles. And then whether you're a private organization or a government, you probably want some rules on how are these vehicles used. So 102-34 subpart B, official use of government vehicle. There's a lot of discussion on home to work rules. In other words, hey, can I take my government vehicle home? Can I take it home overnight? Can I leave it there for a week? There's a lot of rules that talk about home to work use, and typically anything permanent for the government has to be authorized at the highest level. So like for the Department of Energy, it's not somebody that works in Washington, but it's I believe it's actually the Secretary of Energy has to approve it. So pretty strict rules on home to work use. And then there's a lot of classes and a lot of information on liability and responsibility for operation of government vehicles. Basically, in a nutshell, if you're properly operating that vehicle in a work or authorized use of that vehicle, and you get into an accident, you will be covered basically through the government. All right, so now we're getting to maintenance. Subpart F talks about scheduled maintenance of motor vehicles, and it talks about what kind of maintenance programs that you have to have. So first of all, you want to meet manufacturer warranty requirements. If the vehicle comes with a warranty, as an operating unit, you can save a lot of money, basically making sure that any warranty work is done by the dealer, or those costs are paid back by the dealer. So you want to make sure that you don't do anything like skip some oil changes or some other preventive maintenance that would void your warranty. And then And then first and foremost, though, you want to ensure the safe and economical operating condition of the motor vehicle throughout its life. So in other words, you want to take a look at the tires, replace those when needed, windshield wipers, basically all the basic items that you would take care of on your own vehicle to make sure that you can operate it safely. And then there's rules if you are in an accident, motor vehicle crash reporting. I believe it's the SF91 form is used to report a crash. And then also who you send the crash reports to. So somewhere in your organization, you're probably going to have a point of contact on somebody that will collect all of these crash reports, maybe do some investigation on their own and track that data. And then typically for a government agency, they'll work hand in hand with the legal department, and somewhere in there, they'll handle the insurance claims or the claims against the government. And again, for federal fleets with GSA lease vehicles, maintenance tracking is handled by the GSA fleet leasing program. So now we're going to get to disposal. So several ways to dispose of vehicles. One, you can trade them in for credit against the purchase of the new replacement vehicle. And again, this is only if you own that vehicle. Do an exchange sale. The easiest thing, if you have GSA lease vehicles, again, trade in a GSA vehicle per the GSA schedule. And GSA will tell you, hey, these vehicles are coming due for replacement. And then you will get your order in for those replacements per their schedule. Other options: public auction, internet marketing, donating the vehicle, or in some cases, you know what? We're just going to send this to the salvage yard. It's not worth doing anything else with. And if you're in the property group or property manager, you also know that there are a ton of rules and regulations on how to handle the disposal of vehicles or any personal property. And then 10234 has two relevant sections for disposal. One is replacement of motor vehicles, and then subpart H, disposal of motor vehicles. Okay, so fleet accounting and reporting tools. Significant difference between property management and fleet management accounting is the software that's required. And just for an example, for personal property, you may use a database such as Sunflower. Basically, it'll track, yeah, hey, we acquired this property. You know, here's a description, here's the value. And then depending on your system and process, here's the owner, here's the location, and you may not touch that piece of personal property or piece of equipment maybe until the end of the life when you go to dispose of it again. Or if it is a piece of tract property, you may only go out there and touch it during your inventory process. However, with the motor vehicle fleet, it is literally, a moving target all the time. And if you have a large fleet, you're going to want a commercial fleet management information system, something that's built and designed for tracking motor vehicles. And for example, the system that we had at INL would track everything from the acquisition. So like I said, we would collect all the essential data. We'd even take pictures of the vehicle. We would load that into the fleet management information system. And then from there, we could schedule the preventive maintenance. We put that schedule in there. We would track all the costs associated with it. We would track who the end user was, and then also track the fueling, crash data. Basically, everything in that entire life cycle would go in that fleet management information system. And then we could also pull reports. We'd also develop performance standards or metrics, and then we pull reports to make sure that, hey, are we being efficient in the operation of the fleet? If you have a distributed or a dispersed fleet, you want to make sure you have processes for field reporting. So we have a fleet out in the middle of the desert, and we have other pieces of the fleet in town or 50 miles away, or maybe gosh, we've had vehicles basically spread out across the country. What's the process for reporting their information back to the main group? And then again, data for fleet management decision making. That kind of ties back to the performance standards and the metrics and your efficient operation of the fleet. And for the federal fleet, you also have Subpart J, Federal Fleet Report. You have the Federal Automotive Statistical Tool, or FAST. And this is an annual summary of fleet statistics to report your inventory, your acquisitions, the operating cost over the last year, the miles traveled over the last year, and the fuel and the type of fuel that was used over the last year. And if you're trying to do this, if you've got a larger fleet, you're trying to do this with the Excel spreadsheets, it's going to be a chore. So one of the other advantages of having a commercial fleet management information system, again, that is designed to track motor vehicles and automotive life cycle, is you can develop reports that essentially you can dump out of your fleet management information system and set up your input into FAST. So instead of taking days, weeks, months to pull that report together, you can pull it together fairly quick. I think we're down to like 2 or 3 days, and that was for a fleet of over 450 light-duty vehicles. And then that FAST report provides federal agencies with reporting information required by the Energy Policy Act and executive orders. So, for example, for the fleet at the INL, that would roll up to the Department of Energy level for Idaho, and then that would roll up to DOE headquarters. And basically at the headquarters level, they aggregate all of that information for all of the Department of Energy. The other agencies will be doing the same thing. And then that one report is basically used for the Energy Policy Act and executive orders. And like I said, in the fleet management information system, there's a ton of information that goes in there. As we talked about, acquisition details and cost, the asset details, how much you're paying either for the GSA, or you may have a commercial lease, how much you paid for upfitting or modifications, and again, for the executive order, the fuel used by cost, source, and type. So in other words, are we getting the fuel mainly from our pumps or our fuel sources on site, or is it a commercial agency? Any preventative and repair maintenance cost, utilization, miles, hours, and trips. And the reason hours is in there, a good example is for security vehicles. If you're going off utilization just based on miles, a lot of security vehicles will be inside for example, a fenced area, or basically they'll just be parked in one area, and that vehicle is being used as a remote office, if you will, for that officer that is out there, monitoring, whether it's a fence or a border, whatever they're out there for. Another thing that the fleet management information system can do, if it's robust enough, is motor pool reservations. So motor pool, same as a car rental. So instead of having every organization or every department having their own vehicles, you could develop a motor pool where, hey, you know what? I do need a government vehicle, but it may be, only for some meetings or for something, periodic. So, like once a week, once every couple of weeks, I might need to run out to the site or something like that. So if you have a robust fleet management information system, a lot of them will have a module for motor pool reservations, including the dispatching and, of course, the all-important billing. So how do you bill those costs back to the end user? And then also in that FMIS is the disposal details and any funds received. Okay, so sources of information. General Service Administration, or GSA, ton of information out there for you. And I just checked these links yesterday, and they all work and they're all correct. But in GSA, you can get those federal management regulations, the FMRs. We've been talking a lot about 102.34. A lot of information on GSA fleet. A lot of other government links, including policy links. The next website, the Federal Energy Management Program, or FEMP, a lot of tools, resources, again, refer you back to laws, requirements, a lot of information on vehicles, battery technology, alternative fuel. One of the main inputs for information for FEMP, for the Federal Energy Management Program, is a sister laboratory out of Colorado, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL. And if you go out there on that FEMP program, there's a ton of information out there where you can, like, for example, you can do cost comparison. Hey, if I want to convert my fleet over to battery electric, what are the costs associated with that? And then, what are the for the total cost of ownership? What are the savings for making that change? They've got websites out there for, hey, where's the nearest alternative fueling station? Where's the nearest battery charging station, for battery electric vehicles? Just a ton of information out there. The Clean Cities Coalition Network is another Department of Energy funded network, but the Clean Cities Coalition is not geared just for the federal government. For example, the one that we belong to is the Yellowstone Teton Clean City Association, and they're based out of Jackson, Wyoming. And the whole purpose behind the Clean Cities is they want to encourage partnerships and projects between fuel producers and all kinds of fleets. So, for example, up at Jackson, they were working with the local Jackson Hole Metro to help convert their fleet over to clean energy sources. So I believe there's about 10 networks out there, and it's pretty easy to figure out which area you're into and contacts for that Clean Cities. But a lot of really good information, a lot of really good energy associated with, like I said, trying to make those connections between fleets and different fuel providers or different vendors out there. And again, their push is for clean or zero energy vehicles. And the last one, the American Public Works Association, another great network out there. And this would be geared more towards like a municipal fleet. So say like a city or small area. But the American Public Works Association, again, a lot of great information out there for public fleets. And then for federal fleets, the NPMA Federal Fleet Certification. If you're in the property world, I'm sure you're familiar with the property certifications. So the Federal Fleet Certifications pretty much mirrors that. So as you can see, you start out at a certified federal fleet specialist, which is the basic knowledge for fleet management professionals. And what I would recommend for this level is that your property folks also your property managers and your property folks take at least this level. If nothing else, if you do have a fleet, even though you may not be directly involved with it, it's always good to have an idea of what your counterpart is running up against and what you can do to help them. Conversely, where we do have our own, or Dynel did have their, or does have their a separate fleet group, a lot of those folks will also go in and take at least the specialist course in property for the same reason. Because yeah, even though you're working day to day with this vehicle, it's still part of that personal property for that organization. And then there's the administrator level, which is next higher up. So basically, if you're like the fleet manager or fleet coordinator, and then that certified federal fleet manager, that little higher course, basically you're going to be overseeing majority of the fleet, and you may or may not be interacting with either your local agency or maybe even headquarters at that level. So in conclusion, fleet management is typically more complex than many other aspects of property management. And a lot of this, like we discussed, goes back to all of the information ongoing that you have to collect ongoing throughout the year. The maintenance, the fuel, the repairs, and as I mentioned, a lot of your other personal property that you come in, that comes into your organization, you may not touch that either until it's time for inventory, or maybe until it's time to dispose of it. So there's a lot of moving parts with fleet, and with the amount of information that you have to track and report on, that makes it typically more complex than other aspects of personal property management. And if you do have a larger fleet, you really should consider employing a professional fleet management staff. And the reason I say that is, as you all know, if you're out there, if you're working in property, and I know the folks that I had at Idaho National Laboratory, you already have a full-time job. And as I mentioned with the fleet, there's a ton of information that you need to take care of and need to track. And I'm telling you, if you have a larger fleet, that is going to be a full-time plus job doing that. Again, as I mentioned before, property managers and their staff of organizations with fleets will benefit from fleet management education and training. And conversely, if you do have a fleet management staff, they should probably take that, at least at specialist level of property too, just so they have a better awareness of what additional needs and requirements are for those vehicles, based on the personal property side. So with that, it looks like we'll have about 10 or 12 minutes for questions.
All right, thanks, Scott. I do have some questions here for you. So I'm going to read them off one at a time and let you answer, but right now I'm currently looking at 3 questions. The first is, can the information in the federal fleet certification be applicable to anyone interested in fleet? Is it generic enough to apply to non-federal environments?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. We will cover a lot, just like we did in this presentation. We will cover a lot of information on the rules and regulations that apply to federal fleet. But if you really get down and you read those regulations and get into that information, basically it's all it's just good fleet management. It's what you should be doing with say like a commercial organizational fleet as well.
Okay, second question. If you were to prioritize 1 or 2 topics in a non-fleet property person developing skills in relative to fleet management, what would those skills be?
That's a good question. Well, I can't think of just one or two topics off the top of my head. If you do have a fleet associated with you, I'd always encourage a little bit of cross training. Go out there and talk to those folks, and if you can, shadow them. Probably from a property standpoint, the biggest interaction I would think it would come with all the reporting. So if you could learn more about the reporting that's required for fleet, and then also how your the work that you're doing on the property side can help with that. I think that would be very helpful. The other topic, just like we covered, is kind of start taking a look at that 102.34 and the regulations that are a little bit separate from your day-to-day personal property regulations that apply to fleet. One of the other things I'd recommend, if you are whether you're fleet and or a property person, and one of the things that we would do, I believe it's at least annually, hey, run a report in your property system, see what you're showing in your property system for vehicles, and then run a report in your fleet management information system. And you may want to start doing this like monthly at first, but one of the things that we found, if we didn't do that, our records would get off a little bit. And again, that fleet is constantly moving. So you're bringing vehicles in, moving vehicles out. And especially if you're working with GSA, that vehicle may physically be gone from your facility, but until GSA finishes their process on it, which may be weeks or a month later, it will still show up in your books. So that would be another area, just basically making sure that you're staying on top of that inventory, both from your property management inventory system and from your fleet management information system.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a recommended checklist of what to consider when selecting an outsourced fleet management service?
We don't have a checklist. There are a number of companies out there. What I would do, one of the things that I would do is I would contact Idaho National Laboratory and talk to their fleet people. Basically, they've been doing this for a long time, and nothing personal, but basically, they would be a really good fleet to benchmark, and by reaching out and contacting different fleets like that and seeing what they use, you will find out all the stuff that you won't find out from the vendor, right? Because if you go strict, and you probably all know this, if you go strictly to the vendor, their tool or their process is just going to be the best thing on the whole planet. You need to go and talk and benchmark with people in organizations that are using that, and find out the pros, the cons, what's working, what's not, what would you do different. And to me, that would be better than any checklist I could come up with as far as selecting what type of fleet management information system.
Okay, thank you. And then just to repeat, it's Idaho National Labs, correct?
Right, Idaho National Laboratory.
Okay. And then another question, would GSA leased be considered an embedded lease?
I'd have to refer that back to a property or contracts person. I have not heard of that term. So,
okay, thank you.
So I'd probably refer that back to your contracts folks.
Okay, and that person says thank you. Something we didn't ask you, are you willing to share a copy of these slides?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, So we will make that available. We will put those on the presentations at mpma.org, and we'll let y'all know when those are available. And then I have another question here. Rick Price, CPPM, he's the executive director of the Pittsburgh Region Clean Cities. He'd be willing to help with helping fleets moving to alternative fuels and technologies and help connect folks. So and to contact Clean Cities Coalition in their area. So just a little plug from Rick, one of our consulting fellows.
Yeah, no, all those coalitions, man, they're great folks to work with.
Okay, terrific. And then just some kudos to you, Scott. Excellent information, and thanks for sharing your expertise and time with us today.
Oh, no, thank you. It's a lot of fun.
All right. I'm not seeing any other questions come in, so I'm going to mute myself and turn it back over to Scott Ray.
Well, thank you, Lisa. And thank you, Scott. Thank you very much for taking the time out to put this presentation together and for presenting it today. I had a bunch of questions that kind of came up myself, but I will probably send you an email about them. Just general questions, because I'm coming from the other world. I'm coming from that property management world. So fleet's always it's different and very similar, as you pointed out, in a lot of different ways. But with that, I think we can go ahead and conclude today's presentation. Make sure you join us next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern or 10 a.m. Pacific time for a presentation on the importance of automation in property management. That'll be presented by Peter Collins, who works for ADB Tracking. So certainly, if you're interested, check that out. Again, Scott, thank you so much for presenting today. And thank you, Lisa, for your support. And we will see you all at our next webinar. So see you next Wednesday. Have a good rest of your week, everyone.